Oh, thank you for joining us again, and it's still Martinsons Alexeis. So we stopped our before we went on the pause. We talked about some kind of differences between charismatics and reformed, and you said when you were talking to them, you would be cautious about the things where you disagree, and at some point they can trump saying, well, that's what the Spirit says. And I have a comment on that. It's actually interesting that if I understood theology correctly, Spirit will never say something that goes against the Bible.
No.
But what would you say why any Christian should at least learn a little bit about Reformed theology, and where does the Reformed theology stand on the question about Spirit?
So you have two questions. Why do people have to learn something about? Why do people need to learn something about Reformed theology?
Yes.
Is the first. So I think, it kind of goes back to the question why I'm, pastor of the Reformed Church, and I represent the strand of theology that we call Reformed. I think if you are seriously studying the Bible, you don't have to call yourself Reformed to actually be Reformed. Because I think, some of the basic doctrines about God's sovereignty, the depravity of man, the salvation by grace, the unconditional election, the perseverance of saints, all these fundamental things, they are in the Bible. And if you believe them, you are like Reformed, even if you don't call yourself Reformed. So I think, sometimes we put these labels on people, and of course we need to belong to a wider body of tradition, which is not bad in itself. Therefore I would say you don't need to study Reformed theology, but you need to study Bible and do it good. And see what happens, where you end up. So that's the answer to your first question. About Holy Spirit, sometimes John Calvin, I think it is, if I'm not mixing up something, but he's called the theologian of Holy Spirit. Holy Spirit is there in the Reformed theology, and he is active. He's the one who is opening eyes. He's the one who is taking part in the sanctification process of a Christian. He is very prominent in the Reformed theology, and you can't, you can't imagine Reformed theology without that, strong emphasis in the work of Spirit. Of course, when we talk about the work of the Spirit and the person of Spirit, the Reformed people would not go in the kind of the charismatic direction right away, where we emphasize the outward gifts. So for not all charismatics, and guys, if you're listening, you're cool guys, but so some trends of charismatic theology, they use the Holy Spirit as this gift-giving thing. These outward exciting gifts is the work of the Spirit,
such as
miracles, tongues, weird things, revelations, and things like that. But that's not that that's part. In Corinthians we in 1 Corinthians we see that it's part of Spirit's work, but it's much more. It's much more substantial than that. Yeah, the Spirit. Jesus in John's Gospel, he says, I'm leaving, but I'm sending a comforter who will basically, help you to continue to be Christian with a mission in this world.
Right. But how about people who, let's say, might confront you with questions about the Spirit's gifts of the Spirit,
Yeah.
such as you mentioned, tongues,
Yes.
and of course the list goes on, and say, hey, well, if the church doesn't practice them, that there is something wrong.
Yeah. I mean, to answer your question, we probably need another hour.
Well,
as always, you have very good questions and solid questions. I would go back to passages like 1 Corinthians chapters 12 to 14, where this question is actually discussed, and it's interesting. So 12 to 14, 1 Corinthians, it's all about spiritual gifts. It's very interesting how Paul in that section he addresses it. So first he wants to show that Corinthians, you guys, maybe you have all these things you're bragging about, but you have to understand that these gifts are given for the building up of the church, not your personal gain or, hey, look at me kind of attitude. They have to be executing in a loving manner. If it's not executed in a loving manner, it's worthless. Chapter 13, right? Spirit gives as he pleases. You can't demand from God. He gives to whomever he wants. So that means not everyone receives everything, and it's perfectly fine with the Spirit, right? But what is important is how Paul starts this section, chapter 12, and how he ends this section of chapter 14. Because he starts and ends it with this interesting word that's sometimes translated in various ways, but in Greek it's this pneumatikoi, which is either the spiritual ones, like the people, or the spiritual things. So it's not talking necessarily about gifts, but it's talking about who, regarding the spiritual ones, or spiritual people, or the mature Christians. And in chapter 12, the beginning of chapter 12, the spiritual ones, the real deal, are those who can confess that Jesus is Lord. At the end of this section, chapter 14, Paul says the spiritual ones, the real deal, are those who obey the Lord. So confess the Lord, obey the Lord. And all the gifts in between, they don't define if you are a true, genuine Christian or church. It is the confession that Jesus is the Lord and the obedience to this Lord that defines if you're a true believer and true church. So, yeah, that's the starting point, and then of course, we can debate about.
Well,
not now, but the gifts, if they continue today or they have ceased to exist, and all these things. But
yeah. Well, you're probably right that to discuss this gifts thing, we probably need another hour.
yeah.
Maybe even more, because of, as you mentioned, there are many dogmas or thoughts whether these things still exist or some of them have ceased to exist. But yes. So, do you think that it is possible, if you are a newborn Christian, it's possible that you don't have any gifts? And in this case, I do mean gifts of the Spirit.
So I want to be careful how we answer it, because the list, let's say in Corinthians, how many things that Paul has on the list? 5, 6, 7 things, but it kind of goes back to the question: do these kind of gifts, do they carry on through the centuries in 21st century? Because your understanding of that will affect how you answer that question you asked.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that the Bible teaches that new believers have to have either, speaking of tongues or ability to heal someone or do these other things that are mentioned, let's say in 1 Corinthians. And if you don't have those, then something's wrong with you. Your faith is not real. The Bible is not teaching that. What Bible is teaching, in Galatians, the fruit of the Spirit. So basically, if you are a believer, Spirit does something in you, and it is transformation.
Mm-hmm.
It is change. It's not those outward gifts necessarily, but there's definitely a change. Spirit is actively working in you, and that should be visible in your life. I believe that, everyone is, Paul says every member is valuable in the church family. So everyone can do something to kind of, help the church body to function as it should. But we can't start, looking at people, you don't have any of those 5 or 6 specific gifts, therefore you are not a Christian. So that's unbiblical, and it's very dangerous, and it's very arrogant as well.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and to wrap up our interview, are there any things that you would like to encourage or suggest to our watchers or listeners,
yes,
as a pastor or just a good guy?
So subscribe and like his videos. No, do that. But also, and not, read Bible and think about new creation more. Because I think we as Christians, we unfortunately sometimes love this world too much and we forget about the new creation. And I think read Bible, think about new creation more, and you'll do just fine.
And read Ephesians.
Yes.
Thank you, Pastor, and I hope you have a great day, and if God wills,
Thank you,
maybe we'll talk again.
Yes, absolutely.
See you later.
See you guys.